the second reading, Paul writes about grace. And grace, if that's one of those churchy words, maybe you don't actually know the definition. It is the free and unmerited favor of God. Free and unmerited. We don't deserve it. We don't earn it. It is free, and the Lord just offers it to us. And so today, it's this idea of an invitation to accept God's grace. But some of you, if you know something about this, maybe you're just the grace is not your best word because you think that's a Protestant thing. And we don't do that sort of thing. But when Paul wrote this to the church, he wrote it to everybody, and indeed he wrote it to the early church, and that was a Catholic church, so he wrote that to us. No, grace matters to us. And yet, there are some of us that we're just a little uncomfortable with this idea of, I don't have to earn it. We want to earn it. Maybe some of us grew up in households where we earned the favor we got from parents or coaches or something like that. We did well in school, we did well on a sports team, then people liked us. And when we didn't do well, they did not like us. And we put that onto God, and we think, well, I've got to do all these things, because if I don't do all this stuff, God won't love me. And Paul is reminding us, no, not by works do you receive God's grace. But then, of course, as you start to think about that, maybe suddenly you jump to the other side and you go like, oh wait, I don't have to do anything? It's all free? And then you look at someplace else where Paul writes about that topic, and he says, hey, does grace give you a license to sin? No, not at all. And so how do you work that out? How do you work this idea out that, yeah, there are things I'm supposed to do. You graciously did one of them. You are at Mass today. How do I reconcile that I'm supposed to do this with this idea that God loves me regardless of what I do? It's, I think, a question of order. And it might be best shown by a story most of you are familiar with, when Jesus was, a woman caught in adultery was brought to Jesus. This is a grave sin, as you would know. It was a capital crime at that point. And if you read that story and you look at how Jesus handles it, you realize that Jesus does indeed forgive her. And you also realize that Jesus does very much tell her not to do it again. There is both this idea of grace, forgiveness, and love, but there is also this idea of there's stuff you need to be doing. But it's the order that matters. Jesus starts with grace. The first thing he says to her is, I don't condemn you. And then after that, he tells her, here's something, you need to change the way you're living. And that is the way it works out for us. All of us, Catholics, Protestants, all Christians, we believe that the beginning of our relationship with God is all grace. That moment, whether you can name it or whether it was just sort of a gradual process, that place where you got to the point where you said, I believe this. I believe in God, and I believe, as the Creed says, in Jesus. I believe he died. I believe he died for sin. I believe he rose from the dead. All of that stuff, when you get to that point where you say, yeah, I believe that is a moment of grace. St. Augustine would tell you that you didn't even have the willpower to say yes to that. He would suggest to you that God's grace is what allowed you to even say, I believe. And in that moment, then that you didn't earn that moment in any way, shape, or form. That's God being loving and caring and forgiving to you. But then after that, as a result of that, because God has offered you this grace, because you've experienced this love, then it's almost like it's a natural thing. Of course, Having received God's grace, of course I want to come to Mass. Of course I want to pray. Of course I want to grow closer to God. I want to grow closer to God who is offering me all of this love and this care. And so, as they so often put, faith and works are not in competition. It's not a theological discussion where you have to pick one or the other. One flows out of the other. And so what do you do with this? Well, if by chance you are not yet actually sure of your faith, you're just in that point where you're still sort of working it out, and maybe you're learning a bunch of stuff, maybe you're trying to get it in your head and it will get to your heart, or maybe you need one of those encounters with the Lord in confession or at a retreat or something like that where it sort of starts in your heart and goes to your head. I just ask you to pray for that. Pray for that moment of grace where you actually come to realize that, oh my word, God does love me, and He does love me just the way I am. He is not keeping track of all this junk that's in my past. He's willing to let all that go. And if you have experienced that and you, like me, are trying to live it out as best you can, I just pray you'll have moments like I just had, like I have been really having the last few months, this moment where I am feeling God's grace more and more, where I feel like, yeah, there's still a fair amount of junk in my life that God doesn't seem to care. He wants me to do better. He's encouraging me to do better, but none of that is getting in the way of what He is doing for me and what He wants for me. That's the beauty of faith, grace, this idea that we don't have to earn it, that God just loves us. It's so foreign to us in this world, if you will, but it is true. And I just hope you will, at some point, whether now you know about it and you've experienced it, or maybe it's a little down the road like it might be for these children, but I just pray that you'll get to that point where you just realize how much God loves you, and that as He offers us His love and His grace, you will just gladly, with a full heart, say yes.